Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to take a look at LDR in real time as it's happening. I want to talk about the pump consolidate pump setup because that's something I haven't seen in quite some time. It usually happens in specky land, stocks under 50 mil market cap. And I've got a link down below in the comment section that'll show you guys my top 3 favorite setups, but this is by far my favorite out of the 3. And haven't seen it in a long time because speckies haven't really been in play lately. So let me talk you through the setup. It is a rally and a strong rally on a spec stock where there's a little pullback at the highs and then it consolidates and just goes sideways. Now the idea is the consolidation happens near the highs or at the highs, not somewhere in the middle, not like a 50% pullback or a 61.8 and consolidates a little bit lower. The idea of this setup that I trade is that it consolidates, and what we usually see is a little bit of a volume spike as this is sort of ranging, and that's sort of the first indication typically that this is very likely to break out. And we don't actually see that in this, and what I ended up doing was buying around this level here in anticipation of a break, because this consolidation has been happening for well over an hour and it's still at the highs and the volumes clearly have tapered off, so there's no interest in further selling. So that's the idea behind the trade. And my only concern here really is this reload seller at 31 that was happening. So there was a lot of spoofs earlier in the morning that seems to have sort of faded away a little bit, but I'm still cautious about spoofing. Now, I'm showing you this setup in real time because there's 2 things that I expect to happen in this setup. One is on the breakout when it happens on volume like we see here. That's sort of confirmation of the pump consolidate pump setup, of course. So typically where I buy is a small parcel in anticipation of this happening, stop loss below the range, this consolidating range, and then build the position once volumes come in. And then of course there's always the breakout here. That's also something that I consider adding on to if I missed out on buying in anticipation of the break. And worst case scenario, if volumes come in and it gets rejected here at 31 or the retest of the highs, then it's just a matter of selling it out if it starts going back down and trying to take 0 ticks of risk on this. So what we have is high volume break, and you can see it's sort of consolidating here with volumes as well. Now the thing with pump consolidate pump is this setup usually comes with one breakout and then one big retracement. And that retracement, it's hard to really quantify where it goes, but it can go as low as this level here, which is the retest. That's sort of the level that I'm looking at, making sure it holds. And what usually happens is pump, retrace, and then there's one final push. Now, whether that final push breaks into the highs, retests the highs, or it creates a higher high, either one of those is typically what happens. But yeah, so it's difficult to say, or rather it's difficult to trade and try and pick the top of this move on the breakout. What I've started doing in my last few pump consolidate trades is wait for the breakout, wait for the pullback, and don't panic sell on the pullback, and then as it starts swinging back up, add a little bit more to the position as it starts swinging back up. And that's it. And then look, picking the top on the final push is difficult, but I start scaling out when it retests the highs here. So let's assume that this is the high that it's going to. So let's say 34, pulls back to this level here at 31 or 31.5, starts swinging back up. I would start scaling out at 34 because I know that is a level that is very likely to be touched at the very least. It's a very high probability based on this setup historically. So of course there's no guarantees. Of course it can just fail, but based on the history of this setup, this is how I trade this particular setup. So scaling out at 34 and then, or wherever the high is, and then scaling out as it keeps ticking up and selling into a high volume pop is ideal. So you can see this candle here, for example, that's a 1 mil volume on that 1 minute candle. So that would be an ideal place to start selling, is high volume pops. That is kind of what I consider to be the best place to sell, and that's kind of what I tend to do. So picking the very top is difficult, so I like to wait and see for some sort of volume exhaustion and then a turnaround, because I'm never going to sell the top if I do, it's by pure luck. What I do is I ride the momentum between the setup here, and I'm super happy with that move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video, and hopefully we can see how this setup ends up playing out in real time. So again, I don't plan on closing this position out. So we've given LDR a little bit of time, and we can see as it developed, we've got our pump. It sort of consolidated here a little bit, but it didn't pull back and went all the way to 36, started its pullback and consolidated again in a tight little range, but eventually came back down and retested this horizontal. I thought 31 might be the level, or 31.5, but instead it ended up being the top here at 32, pretty much bang on. So touched that one and then went for a bounce. So ended up getting along here at 33. Could have got a bit of a better entry, but saw it had the potential to swing back to the upside. The sellers were really weak there. So ended up catching it at 33. Not the best entry, but the idea now for me is to wait for it to swing back to the upside and create either a retest of this sort of 36 level, probably 36.5, whatever the high was. So start closing out there and then push to the upside and see if that happens. And if it fails to break out, if it shows any sign of weakness, then I'll be closing it out for whatever ticks of profit that may end up being. So we'll come back after this move. So coming back to LDR, we can see that it ended up bouncing off this 32, attempting to retest the highs of the day. Missed a buy tick, which is quite unfortunate, but I think this highlights exactly how good this setup can be. Now, it doesn't guarantee, this pump consolidate setup, that it's going to break into new highs. It doesn't even guarantee that it's going to retest the highs. But historically, I find that this setup does exactly what I mentioned, which is once it hits this high, whatever that high may be, and in real time, it's difficult to tell. If we go up to this point in time, it's hard to tell if this high does a pullback and it's starting to swing back up. It's difficult to tell. But once you identify that it's going sideways, you've found yourself a pump consolidate setup. You can see the volumes have tapered off, the selling is almost non-existent, and it's just going sideways. Whether it ticks up or goes a little bit back down into a range at this horizontal, that doesn't really matter so much. What matters is that it goes pretty much sideways on lowering volumes. And from here, what we can see is that eventually volumes do come in real time, and then that's the trade, is spotting that volume, spotting that breakout, and that's the trade that I take. And this is the pump consolidate pump, ladies and gentlemen.